In the cartridge code of the earliest Pokémon games, there exist moments that 99% of players never witnessed, conversations that triggered only under precise conditions, and glitches that revealed the fragile architecture beneath Kanto's surface. These are not the well-documented exploits or widely discussed strategies, but rather the quiet peculiarities that slipped through testing, the forgotten dialogue branches that required specific player behaviors to activate, and the unexpected consequences of pushing Game Boy hardware to its absolute limits. Before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe for more gentle videos, and let me know where you're listening from tonight as we examine the hidden corners of Generation 1, starting with a scene in Professor Oak's laboratory that remained invisible to nearly every trainer who began their journey in Pallet Town. The laboratory belonging to Professor Oak contains 3 separate scripted events, though the vast majority of players encountered only the first 2 during their playthrough. The initial visit sees the player receive their starter Pokémon and engage in the first rival battle, establishing the foundational rivalry that would persist throughout the entire journey. From this point, most trainers proceeded directly to Viridian City to retrieve Oak's parcel, completing what they assumed was the full sequence of laboratory interactions. The second visit, triggered upon returning with the parcel, rewards the player with the Pokédex, the encyclopedia device that would become central to the completion-focused gameplay loop. Most players, having received both starter and Pokédex, naturally progress toward Pewter City to challenge Brock, the first gym leader, never suspecting that a third laboratory event awaited under specific conditions. The hidden third event requires a particular sequence of actions that few players would naturally perform. After obtaining the Pokédex, the player must travel to Route 22 for an optional early rival battle, an encounter that many trainers skip entirely in their eagerness to progress toward the first gym badge. Following this optional battle, returning to Oak's laboratory for a third time triggers dialogue that only appears if the player has not yet purchased Pokeballs from the Viridian City Mart. Oak, noticing that the trainer still possesses only their starter Pokémon, expresses concern about the player's progress and offers 5 complimentary Pokeballs to encourage further exploration and catching. This compassionate gesture from the professor represents a safety net designed to prevent players from becoming stuck, though the specific conditions required to trigger it meant that most trainers never witnessed this particular kindness. The dialogue itself carries a gentle, encouraging tone, with Oak explaining that catching Pokémon is fundamental to becoming a skilled trainer. The 5 Pokeballs he provides are not treated as a gift so much as basic equipment that any beginning trainer should possess. The scene was clearly intended to catch players who might be struggling with the game's core mechanics, offering assistance without explicitly stating that the player had failed to grasp fundamental concepts. The implementation reveals careful consideration of player psychology, providing help in a manner that feels natural rather than condescending. Before you settle in, maybe tap subscribe for more calm stories, and share where in the world you're watching from tonight. The obscurity of this third event stems from the narrow window in which it can be accessed and the counterintuitive nature of the required actions. Most players who completed the optional Route 22 battle did so with a team of multiple Pokémon, having already caught additional creatures during their initial journey through Route 1 or Route 22 itself. The requirement that the player possess only their starter meant that accessing this dialogue demanded either deliberate avoidance of wild Pokémon or a specific sequence where the player rushed through early areas without engaging in the catching mechanics. The existence of this fail-safe dialogue demonstrates the developer's awareness that some players might struggle with the transition from receiving a starter to building a complete team, though the implementation ensured that only a tiny fraction of the player base would ever see it. The narrative design of Pokémon Yellow included plans for an anime-inspired cutscene that never made it into the final game, though remnants of its code remain buried in the cartridge data. Data miners examining the game's programming discovered unused battle sequence code containing a distinctive message that read simply, "Hurry, get away." The code exists without clear context or connection to any specific in-game event, suggesting that it was removed relatively late in development after being partially implemented. The phrasing and urgency of the message point toward a specific moment from the anime's first episode, where Ash and his Pikachu are attacked by a flock of aggressive Spearow while fleeing from Pallet Town. The anime scene holds significant narrative importance as the moment when Ash and Pikachu truly bond, with the young trainer shielding his Pokémon from the attacking birds. Translating this moment into the game would have required a scripted encounter where the player faced overwhelming odds and was encouraged to flee rather than fight, a reversal of the typical Pokémon battle philosophy. The unused code suggests that Game Freak attempted to recreate this emotional beat from the anime, implementing a battle sequence where fleeing was the intended outcome. The message, "Hurry, get away," would have appeared in place of standard battle options, directing the player toward escape rather than combat. The technical implementation of this scrapped cutscene raised questions about how it would have functioned within the game's structure. The code contains no clear trigger conditions, leaving uncertain when or where this special battle would have occurred. The most logical placement would have been early in the game, shortly after receiving Pikachu and before reaching Viridian City, mirroring the timeline of the anime episode. However, the lack of complete implementation suggests that technical limitations or design concerns led to its removal before it could be properly integrated into the game's progression. Memory constraints on the original Game Boy cartridges represented a constant challenge during development, forcing the team to make difficult decisions about which features to include and which to cut. The animated cutscene, requiring additional graphics, dialogue, and scripting beyond standard wild encounters, would have consumed valuable cartridge space that might have been better allocated to other features. The decision to remove it likely came down to resource management, with the developers concluding that the emotional impact of this single scene did not justify the memory cost. The preservation of this unused code in the final game suggests that it was removed too late in development to be completely purged from the cartridge. Development teams often leave remnants of cut content in their games, whether due to time constraints or concerns about introducing bugs by removing interconnected code. The discovery of this unused sequence, decades after the game's release, demonstrates the enduring interest in Pokémon's development history and the dedication of the data mining community to uncovering every hidden detail. A lesser-known glitch in Pokémon Red and Blue allows players to obtain all 3 starter Pokémon on a single save file through careful manipulation of the game's save system. The exploit requires precise timing and carries significant risk of corrupting save data, making it a technique attempted primarily by players willing to experiment with the game's underlying mechanics. The process begins with starting a new game and selecting the desired starter Pokémon, followed by saving immediately after the selection is confirmed. The player then resets the game and starts another new file, deliberately interrupting the save process at a specific moment to merge data from both save files. The core mechanic of this glitch relies on save corruption, intentionally breaking the normal save file structure to combine elements from 2 separate game states. When executed correctly, the corruption places the player in the second game's starting bedroom while retaining the party data from the first save file, which already contains a starter Pokémon. This state allows the player to proceed to Professor Oak's laboratory and select a second starter, as the game registers that no starter has been chosen in the current world state, despite the player already possessing one in their party. The timing required to successfully corrupt the save files in the desired manner is extremely precise, measured in individual frames of animation. Interrupting the save process too early results in the corruption failing to take hold, leaving the player with their original save file in Oak's laboratory. Saving too late overwrites the first file completely, eliminating the party data needed for the glitch to function. The most dangerous outcome occurs when the interruption happens during a particularly unstable frame, potentially corrupting both save files beyond recovery and forcing the player to restart entirely. The frame window for successful corruption is narrow enough that achieving it requires either exceptional timing, repeated attempts, or the use of save states on emulator software. Players attempting this glitch on original hardware often spent hours resetting and retrying, learning through trial and error which visual cues indicated the correct moment to power off the console. The difficulty of execution meant that this glitch, despite being theoretically available to any player, remained obscure even among dedicated fans who actively sought out exploits and sequence breaks. Successfully obtaining a second starter through this method theoretically allows for repetition of the process to acquire the third starter as well, though each iteration carries the same risks and timing challenges. Players who manage to obtain all three starters through this glitch often considered it a badge of honor, proof of their willingness to push the game beyond its intended boundaries. The glitch's existence highlights the fragility of the Game Boy's save system and the unexpected interactions that emerge when players manipulate data structures in ways the developers never anticipated. The trade evolution mechanic, fundamental to completing the Pokédex, can be bypassed through an exploit that allows players to obtain evolved forms of trade-exclusive Pokémon without ever connecting with another game. This method relies on the same underlying glitch that enables encountering Mew and other impossible Pokémon, manipulating the game's battle flag system to force specific encounters, regardless of location or normal spawning rules. The Trainer Fly glitch, as it came to be known, provides access to virtually any Pokémon in the game's data through careful manipulation of special stat values and battle flags. The process begins by setting a battle flag through a specific sequence involving a long-range trainer and strategic use of the pause menu. Trainers with extended sightlines, who engage the player from multiple tiles away, create the necessary conditions for flag manipulation. By opening the start menu on the exact frame when the trainer's sightline activates, the player prevents the battle from triggering, while the game maintains an internal flag, indicating that a battle should occur upon the next available opportunity. This lingering battle flag becomes the foundation for the exploit, creating a state where the game expects to initiate combat, but lacks specific information about what that combat should involve. The second phase of the exploit involves providing the game with encounter data by entering a battle against a specific Pokémon whose special stat corresponds to the desired index number. Every Pokémon in Generation 1 is assigned an index number in the game's data, and these numbers determine which species appears during glitched encounters. By battling a Pokémon with a special stat matching the index of a trade evolution like Gengar, Alakazam, or Golem, the player essentially tells the game what to spawn when the lingering battle flag finally triggers. The mathematical precision of this exploit creates opportunities for obtaining specific Pokémon at particular levels through additional manipulation of stats. Each stat modification affects the resulting encounter's characteristics, allowing players to reduce levels through attack-lowering moves like Growl, or increase them through other means. A Gengar obtained through this method might appear at level 7 by default, but using Growl 6 times before ending the battle reduces the encounter level to 1, creating the unusual situation of possessing a fully evolved ghost type before challenging the first gym. The ability to obtain trade evolutions without trading addresses one of the most significant barriers to solo Pokédex completion in the original games. Players without access to a link cable, a second Game Boy, or willing trading partners found themselves permanently unable to register certain Pokémon in their Pokédex under normal circumstances. The trainer fly glitch, while certainly not an intended solution, provided a workaround that made true solo completion possible for dedicated players willing to learn the technical execution. The index number system that enables this glitch reveals interesting details about the game's internal organization and development history. The order in which Pokémon appears in the index does not match their Pokédex numbers, suggesting that species were implemented in a different sequence than their final numbering. Mew, despite being number 151 in the Pokédex, occupies index position 21, indicating that it was added relatively early in development. This discrepancy between Pokédex order and index order has fueled speculation about the development timeline and which Pokémon were considered foundational to the game's design. Certain moves in Generation 1 possess strange properties that extend far beyond their described effects, creating unintended interactions that fundamentally alter competitive battle dynamics. Focus Energy, a move designed to increase the user's critical hit ratio, actually contains a programming error that reduces critical hit chances instead of increasing them. The bug stems from a misplaced bit flag in the move's code, inverting its intended effect and making the move actively detrimental to use. Players who included Focus Energy in their strategies without understanding this hidden flaw inadvertently sabotaged their own battle performance. The critical hit system itself operates differently in Generation 1 than in later games, with critical hit chance tied directly to the base speed stat of the Pokémon rather than using a flat percentage. Faster Pokémon naturally score critical hits more frequently, creating a significant advantage for species with high-speed stats. This system rewards offensive, speed-focused strategies and makes slower, defensive Pokémon disproportionately vulnerable to critical hits. The interaction between this speed-based critical system and the inverted effect of Focus Energy creates a particularly punishing scenario where players attempting to increase their critical hit rate actually ensure they will never land a critical hit as long as the move's effect remains active. The programming error went unnoticed during development and remained in all Generation 1 games, never receiving a patch or correction. The lack of online resources and widespread information sharing in the game's early years meant that many players never discovered the bug, attributing their lack of critical hits to random chance rather than a broken move. Even players who suspected something was wrong had limited means of confirming their suspicions, as the game provided no internal tools for examining critical hit rates or move effects beyond the brief descriptions in battle. Rest, a move intended to heal the user fully while inducing sleep, contains its own peculiar interaction with the game's sleep mechanics. When a Pokémon uses Rest, it falls asleep for a set duration and awakens automatically after a specific number of turns. However, the sleep counter for Rest operates independently from sleep induced by moves like Sleep Powder or Hypnosis, creating situations where the sleep duration behaves differently depending on the source. A Pokémon asleep from Rest awakens precisely when the internal counter reaches 0, while Pokémon put to sleep by opponent moves face variable wake-up times influenced by additional random factors. The status condition mechanics in Generation 1 lack the refinements and balancing adjustments that would be introduced in later games, creating scenarios where certain status effects prove overwhelmingly powerful. Freeze, unlike in later generations, has no turn limit and no chance of naturally thawing, meaning a frozen Pokémon remains frozen indefinitely unless hit by a fire-type move. This makes freeze-inducing moves like Blizzard extraordinarily powerful, as successfully freezing an opponent effectively removes their Pokémon from battle permanently. The lack of counterplay options and the permanent nature of the condition made freeze the most devastating status effect in competitive play. Partial trapping moves like wrap, bind, and clamp contain a programming oversight that allows them to prevent the opponent from acting for multiple consecutive turns when they successfully hit. The game's code fails to properly reset the turn counter between uses, meaning a Pokémon caught in a partial trapping move remains unable to act until the move ends or misses. This oversight transforms moves like wrap into powerful stalling tools capable of completely shutting down opponents, particularly when used by faster Pokémon that consistently move first. Dragonite's wrap became infamous in Generation 1 competitive play precisely because of this unintended behavior, allowing it to trap and defeat opponents without giving them any opportunity to retaliate. The badge boost glitch represents another hidden quirk of Generation 1's mechanics, applying stat boost to Pokémon whenever they use specific stat-modifying moves, regardless of whether those moves should affect those particular stats. Each gym badge provides passive stat boosts that are meant to remain constant throughout battle, but the game incorrectly reapplies these boosts every time the player uses a move that modifies any stat. Using a move like Sword Stance, which raises attack, causes the game to reapply all badge boosts, including those to defense, speed, and special stats. This unintended behavior creates a compounding advantage where using any stat-boosting move provides benefits far beyond the move's described effect. The ramifications of the badge boost glitch extend throughout competitive play, making certain strategies significantly more powerful than intended. Pokémon that naturally learn stat-boosting moves gain disproportionate benefits from gym badges, while those relying solely on attacks miss out on the additional hidden boosts. The glitch rewards aggressive, setup-focused strategies that stack multiple stat boosts, as each boosting move triggers the badge boost reapplication. Players aware of this hidden mechanic could leverage it to create overwhelming statistical advantages, while those unaware fought at a disadvantage without understanding why. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The Pokémon Tower in Lavender Town houses more than the ghosts and tragedy explicitly shown in the game's surface narrative, as data miners have uncovered references to cut content involving Team Rocket and Ghost-type Pokémon that never made it into the final version. The most significant discovery involves an unused Team Rocket team composition that includes 2 Marowak, a species closely tied to the tower's central story about a deceased Marowak mother. The presence of multiple Marowak in Team Rocket's possession raises immediate questions about their connection to the ghost encounter and whether a more elaborate storyline was planned before being simplified or removed. The Cubone evolutionary line carries unique significance in Generation 1, as every Cubone is said to wear the skull of its deceased mother, creating a dark origin story that stands apart from most Pokémon lore. The Ghost Marowak encounter in Pokémon Tower represents the literal manifestation of this tragedy, showing players the consequences of Team Rocket's actions in a manner unusually direct for the series. The unused team data suggesting that Team Rocket members once carried Marowak on their teams implies a more explicit connection between the organization and the tower's haunted reputation. The existence of this cut content has led to speculation about whether an entire subplot was removed from the game, potentially one that explored Team Rocket's activities in Lavender Town more thoroughly. The final game presents Team Rocket's presence in the tower as opportunistic, with the organization using the location for radio frequency experiments without clear connection to the ghost encounters. A version of the game where Team Rocket actively hunted Marowak would have created a darker, more explicitly violent tone that might have been deemed inappropriate or too complex for the target audience. The decision to cut Team Rocket Marowak teams could also have been purely practical, related to memory limitations or balancing concerns. Including multiple Team Rocket grunts with Marowak would have required additional sprite data, dialogues, and battle programming, consuming valuable cartridge space. Alternatively, the developers might have concluded that having multiple Marowak in Team Rocket's possession diluted the emotional impact of the single ghost encounter, making the mother's death less unique and therefore less meaningful. The ambiguity surrounding this cut content ensures it remains a subject of fascination for players interested in the game's development history. The evidence exists in the form of data references, but lacks the context that would explain definitively why these teams were planned and why they were removed. This incomplete picture invites speculation and interpretation, allowing players to imagine alternative versions of Pokémon Tower's narrative that might have been darker, more complex, or simply different from what ultimately shipped. The connection between Kanto and Johto extends beyond geographical proximity, as several Generation 1 characters have hidden relationships to the neighboring region that only became clear with the release of Gold and Silver. Lance, the Dragon Master who serves as the final member of the Elite Four and later becomes champion, originates from Blackthorn City in Johto rather than from any Kanto location. His specialty in Dragon-type Pokémon directly connects to Blackthorn's Dragon's Den, a training ground for Dragon specialists that appears in Generation 2. The revelation of Lance's origins recontextualizes his presence in Kanto's Pokémon League, suggesting he traveled to the neighboring region specifically to compete at the highest levels of competitive battling. Lance's familial connection to Claire, the Blackthorn City gym leader in Generation 2, establishes a dragon training lineage that spans both regions. The two are cousins, both trained in the same tradition of dragon mastery that defines Blackthorn's battling culture. This relationship implies that dragon training techniques developed in Johto influenced Kanto's Elite Four through Lance's participation, creating a cultural exchange between regions that predates the player's journey. The existence of this connection raises questions about how many other Kanto characters might have undisclosed ties to Johto, relationships that were planned from the beginning, but only revealed once both regions were accessible. The Indigo Plateau serves as the shared Pokémon League for both Kanto and Johto, a detail that only becomes apparent in Generation 2 when players from Johto travel to the same location to challenge the Elite Four. This geographical sharing suggests political and cultural ties between the regions that extend beyond simple proximity. The presence of trainers from both regions competing for the same championship implies either a formal alliance or a shared cultural institution that governs competitive battling across multiple territories. The timeline between Generations 1 and 2 creates additional complexity in understanding regional relationships, as 3 years pass between Red's championship and Gold's journey. During this interval, Lance transitions from Elite Four member to champion. Blue loses his championship title and becomes a gym leader, and the entire Elite Four roster changes. These shifts indicate that the Indigo Plateau League operates as a dynamic institution where positions are earned and lost rather than permanently held, creating a competitive environment where even the most skilled trainers can be displaced by newcomers. The reveal of Lance's Johto origins adds depth to his character and motivations, transforming him from a generic dragon master into a specific individual with cultural roots and familial obligations. His decision to compete in Kanto's league rather than remaining in Johto suggests either a desire to test himself against different opponents or perhaps a personal goal to spread dragon training techniques to a new region. The game provides no explicit explanation for why Lance chose Kanto, leaving his motivations open to player interpretation. The trainer fly glitch that allows early access to rare Pokémon operates on principles that seem almost intentionally designed for exploitation, though in reality, they emerged from the interaction of multiple unrelated game systems. The core mechanism involves creating a pending battle state without completing that battle, effectively leaving the game in a liminal condition where it expects combat to occur, but lacks the normal context for initiating that combat. This pending state persists across area transitions and other game events, waiting for specific triggers to finally resolve the expected battle. The exploitation of this pending battle state begins with long-range trainers, NPCs whose sight lines extend multiple tiles and trigger battles from a distance. By opening the start menu on the exact frame when a long-range trainer's sightline activates, the player prevents the normal battle sequence from beginning, while the game internally registers that a battle should occur. The start menu action interrupts the event chain, creating a split state where the battle flag is set, but the battle itself never initiates. Closing the menu and moving away from the trainer's sightline causes the NPC to turn and notice the player, but the battle trigger fails to activate again because the flag is already set. This pending battle flag follows the player through subsequent gameplay, waiting for specific conditions to trigger its resolution. The flag checks for battle initiation whenever the player enters certain areas or performs specific actions, but under normal circumstances, it fails to find valid battle data and simply continues waiting. The exploit takes advantage of this waiting period by providing the game with new encounter data through standard wild battles or trainer encounters, data that the pending flag will read when it finally triggers. The special stat of the last Pokémon encountered serves as the index for determining which species appears when the pending battle flag finally resolves. This system creates a direct relationship between regular gameplay actions and the resulting glitched encounter, allowing players to deliberately target specific Pokémon by engineering encounters with creatures possessing the correct special stat values. The precision of this system transforms what might seem like random corruption into a controlled exploit capable of producing predictable results. Gengar, one of the most desirable early game acquisitions, requires encountering a Pokémon with a special stat of 14 to trigger through this glitch. The rival's Squirtle, accessible through the optional Route 22 battle, possesses exactly 14 special when fought at early levels. By battling this Squirtle after setting the pending battle flag, players provide the game with the index number for Gengar, ensuring that the next trigger of the pending flag will spawn a Gengar instead of a normal wild encounter. The level of the glitched encounter can be manipulated through stat modifications applied during the index setting battle, creating opportunities to obtain rare Pokémon at unusually low levels. Using Growl repeatedly on the rival's Squirtle lowers its attack stat, and the game misreads these stat reductions as level reductions when spawning the glitched encounter. Applying Growl 6 times results in a level 1 Gengar, an impossible occurrence under normal circumstances that demonstrates the depth of control players can achieve over this exploit. The practical applications of this glitch extend far beyond simple Pokédex completion, enabling sequence breaks and challenge runs that dramatically alter the game's intended progression. Obtaining a fully evolved ghost type before challenging the first gym creates a massive power imbalance, as Gengar's base stats far exceed anything available through normal early game captures. The speed and special attack stats of even a level 1 Gengar surpass most fully evolved Pokémon available in the mid-game, creating a situation where a player can steamroll through gym leaders with minimal effort. However, The challenge of actually catching the glitched encounter adds an element of risk that prevents this exploit from being entirely trivial. Gengar at level 7, the default level when no stat modifications are applied, appears with its full move pool and will actively try to defeat the player's Pokémon. The fight becomes a race to reduce Gengar's health enough to make capture possible without accidentally causing it to faint, all while managing the player's own weaker early game team. Players who successfully navigate this challenge earn their overpowered ghost type through a combination of technical knowledge and battle skill. The existence of such a powerful exploit in Generation 1 speaks to the experimental nature of the game's development and the limited testing resources available to catch every possible edge case. Modern game development includes extensive quality assurance testing specifically designed to find and eliminate exploits like the trainer fly glitch. But the constraints of Game Boy development in the 1990s made comprehensive testing nearly impossible. The small development team working with cutting-edge hardware had neither the time nor the resources to anticipate every possible interaction between game systems, leading to the creation of exploits that would be discovered and documented by players over decades. The community preservation of knowledge about these glitches represents its own form of cultural history, as information about execution methods, index numbers, and optimal strategies has been passed down through online forums and video guides. Early discoveries made through trial and error by dedicated players have been refined into step-by-step processes accessible to anyone willing to learn, democratizing access to exploits that once required significant technical understanding. The comprehensive documentation of Generation 1 glitches stands as a testament to the passion of the Pokémon community and their dedication to understanding every facet of the games they love. The transformation of these glitches from obscure discoveries to widely known techniques changed how players approached Generation 1 games, creating a distinction between casual playthroughs and technically optimized runs. Speedrunners incorporated glitches into their strategies, using trainer fly and other exploits to complete the game in record times that would be impossible through normal play. Challenge runners used early access to powerful Pokémon to create unique playthrough conditions, setting self-imposed rules about which glitches were permissible and which were off-limits. The philosophical question of whether using glitches constitutes legitimate gameplay or cheating has been debated within the Pokémon community for decades, with different players drawing the line in different places. Some argue that any technique accessible within the game without external modification represents fair play, while others maintain that exploiting obvious bugs violates the spirit of the intended experience. The lack of official guidance on this question has allowed both perspectives to coexist, with players free to define their own boundaries for acceptable play. The design decisions that inadvertently enabled these glitches reveal interesting details about Generation 1's underlying architecture and the technical challenges of Game Boy development. The battle flag system, while creating opportunities for exploitation, also served important functions in managing game state and ensuring that triggered events would eventually resolve. The special stats' dual role in calculating battle statistics and serving as an index reference demonstrates the efficient use of limited data structures where single values performed multiple functions to conserve memory. These technical compromises, necessary for fitting a complete RPG onto a Game Boy cartridge, created the conditions for exploits while simultaneously enabling the game's existence. The preservation of these glitches across multiple versions of Generation 1, including the international releases and the later Yellow version, suggests that fixing them was either impossible or deemed not worth the development resources. Correcting fundamental systems, like the battle flag architecture, would have required extensive reworking of interconnected code, risking the introduction of new bugs or compatibility issues. The development team likely concluded that these exploits, while powerful, existed far enough outside normal gameplay that most players would never encounter them accidentally. The legacy of Generation 1 glitches extends into later games through the community knowledge and exploration mindset they fostered. Players who learned to think critically about game systems and look for unintended interactions in Generation 1 carried that analytical approach to subsequent Pokémon releases, leading to the discovery of exploits and sequence breaks in every generation. The culture of glitch hunting that began with Mew encounters and Trainer Fly has evolved into a sophisticated community practice involving data mining, code analysis, and systematic testing of game mechanics. The specific glitch enabling early Chinger access highlights the arbitrary nature of the index number system and how slight variations in execution produce wildly different results. A special stat of 14 yields Gengar, but 15 produces Nidorino, a dramatically less impressive outcome. The precision required to target specific encounters creates a learning curve where players must understand both the mechanical execution of setting battle flags and the mathematical relationships between stats and index numbers. This knowledge barrier ensures that even though the glitch is well documented, successful execution still requires study and practice. The relationship between Pokémon special stats and their index numbers reveals no clear pattern, appearing almost random in the absence of knowledge about development decisions. Nidoqueen corresponds to Index 16, Nidoking to 7, and Execute to 12, numbers that bear no obvious relationship to the Pokémon's Pokédex positions or evolutionary relationships. This apparent randomness stems from the order in which Pokémon were programmed during development, a sequence that reflected priorities and dependencies known only to the development team. The resulting index list serves as an archaeological record of development, encoding information about which Pokémon were considered foundational and which were added later. The practical application of this knowledge transforms the early game experience completely, replacing the gradual team-building process with immediate access to endgame power levels. A level 1 Gengar knows Lick and Confuse Ray from the start, moves that would not be available to a naturally obtained Ghastly until much later. The ability to immediately begin training a Gengar, rather than slowly evolving through Ghastly and Haunter, saves dozens of hours of grinding while providing access to a fully realized move pool from the beginning of the journey. The choice of which glitched Pokémon to pursue reflects individual player priorities and preferences, with some valuing raw power, while others seek rare species or unique move combinations. Nidoqueen through the rival's Bulbasaur offers excellent typing and well-rounded stats, making it a practical choice for players focused on progression rather than novelty. A Nidoking through Wild Pidgey provides similar benefits with slightly different stat allocation, creating a meaningful choice between two strong options. Execute through the rival's Spearow yields eventual access to Executor, a powerful grass psychic type with excellent special attack. The existence of complete documentation listing every possible index number and its corresponding Pokémon enables players to plan their glitch execution with perfect precision, removing the element of trial and error that early exploiters faced. Modern players can consult comprehensive charts showing which trainers and wild Pokémon produce which index numbers, selecting their targets based on desired outcomes rather than blind experimentation. This accumulated knowledge base represents decades of community effort, with each player's discoveries contributing to the collective understanding. The stat modification mechanics that control encounter levels introduce additional complexity and opportunity for creativity. Beyond simple level reduction, through Growl, players discovered that other stat-modifying moves produce different effects on the glitched encounter's characteristics. Defense-lowering moves affect different aspects of the spawn, creating opportunities to manipulate additional parameters beyond just level. The full scope of possible modifications exceeds what most players explore, with edge cases and unusual combinations producing unexpected results that continue to be documented by dedicated researchers. The tension between using these glitches and experiencing the game as intended creates a personal decision point for every player. The knowledge of the glitch's existence changes how one approaches early game progression, as the possibility of obtaining Gengar before Brock transforms route planning and team composition strategies. Some players deliberately avoid learning about glitches to preserve the intended experience, while others embrace them as part of the game's full mechanical landscape. Neither approach is objectively correct, and the availability of both options enriches the overall player experience. The documentation and teaching of these glitches has evolved from obscure knowledge shared in specialized forums to mainstream content accessible through video guides and written tutorials. The democratization of this information means that any player with internet access can learn to execute even the most complex glitches, eliminating the gatekeeping that once limited this knowledge to dedicated communities. This accessibility has both positive and negative effects, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost, while potentially diminishing the sense of discovery that comes from finding exploits independently. The cultural impact of Generation 1 glitches extends beyond the Pokémon community into broader gaming culture, where these exploits are referenced as examples of emergent gameplay and unintended player creativity. The trainer fly glitch appears in discussions of how players interact with game systems in unexpected ways, using tools provided by developers for purposes never imagined during development. This player agency, the ability to find new uses for existing mechanics, represents a form of collaborative creativity where the community discovers possibilities that the original creators never envisioned. The technical limitations that enabled these glitches also shaped the game in positive ways, forcing developers to create elegant solutions to complex problems. The special stats serving multiple purposes, the battle flag system managing event triggers, and the index number approach to Pokémon identification all emerged from the necessity of fitting massive amounts of content into minimal space. These compromises, while creating exploit opportunities, also demonstrate the ingenuity required to develop compelling games on severely limited hardware. The preservation of Generation 1 code in its original form, without patches or updates, means that these glitches exist in a frozen state, Yongyuan accessible to anyone playing the original cartridges or accurate emulations. Modern games receive constant updates that fix exploits and balance issues, creating a moving target where glitches discovered today might be patched tomorrow. Generation 1's static nature ensures that knowledge documented decades ago remains relevant, creating a stable foundation for community practice and exploration. The relationship between official game content and community-discovered exploits creates an interesting dynamic where players possess knowledge that exceeds the developer's original intentions. The community understands Generation 1's systems more thoroughly than anyone on the development team needed to during creation, having spent decades analyzing every interaction and documenting every edge case. This accumulated expertise represents a form of reverse engineering, where players reconstructed the game's internal logic through experimentation and observation, rather than access to source code. The specific choice of Gengar as a target for early game exploitation reflects its status as one of Generation 1's most desirable Pokémon, combining excellent stats with unique typing and move pool. Ghost-type Pokémon were extremely rare in Generation 1, with only the ghastly line representing the type in the original Pokédex. This scarcity made Gengar particularly valuable, as it offered capabilities unavailable through other species. The combination of rarity and power ensures that obtaining Gengar early creates a qualitatively different gameplay experience, not merely a quantitative advantage. The psychological impact of possessing an impossibly powerful Pokémon from the start transforms the player's relationship with the game's challenge curve. Early gym battles designed to teach fundamental mechanics become trivial when approached with a level advantage measured in dozens of levels. The satisfaction of overcoming challenges through skill and strategy is replaced by the satisfaction of breaking the game's systems and achieving the impossible. Both experiences have value, and the choice between them reflects individual preferences about what makes games enjoyable. The iterative nature of glitch discovery and documentation demonstrates how community knowledge evolves over time, with each generations of players building on previous discoveries. Early exploiters stumbled upon effects through accident and experimentation, gradually understanding the underlying mechanics through trial and error. Later researchers formalized this knowledge into systematic explanations of how the glitches worked and why specific actions produced particular results. Modern players inherit this accumulated wisdom, accessing in minutes what took years for the community to collectively piece together. The preservation of glitch knowledge through video documentation creates a permanent record that transcends individual memory and oral tradition. Players who discovered the trainer fly glitch in the late 1990s can watch modern tutorials explaining the same technique, comparing their original understanding with the refined knowledge that emerged from decades of community analysis. This temporal continuity connects different generations of players through shared exploration of the same game systems, creating a multi-generational community united by curiosity about Generation 1's hidden depths. As we drift deeper into the nature of these obscure discoveries, it becomes clear that they represent more than simple exploits or interesting trivia. They embody a relationship between players and games that extends beyond passive consumption into active exploration and creative reinterpretation. The players who discovered these glitches were not following intended paths, but forging new ones, finding possibilities within the game's structure that existed unintentionally, but no less really. This exploratory mindset defines a certain type of gaming culture, one that values understanding systems deeply enough to bend them toward unintended purposes. The technical architecture enabling these glitches reflects the priorities and constraints of Game Boy development, where every byte of memory carried weight and every system served multiple purposes. The decision to use special stats as index numbers while creating exploit opportunities allowed the game to reference Pokémon identities without maintaining separate lookup tables. This efficiency was not merely elegant, but necessary, as cartridge memory imposed hard limits on what could be included. The glitches emerged from this necessity, side effects of clever solutions to fundamental technical challenges. The community's continued interest in these decades-old exploits demonstrates the enduring appeal of Generation 1 and its unique place in gaming history. Later Pokémon games, while more polished and balanced, lack the rough charm and exploitable mechanics that make Generation 1 so amenable to creative manipulation. The willingness of players to return repeatedly to these early games, discovering new glitches and refining execution techniques, speaks to their fundamental replay value and the depth hidden beneath their simple surface. The transition from obscurity into common knowledge transformed these glitches from secret techniques into standard tools available to anyone willing to learn. This democratization changed what it meant to play Generation 1, creating a divide between those who approached the games casually and those who engaged with the full complexity of their systems. The existence of both casual and technical approaches enriches the overall player base, allowing multiple types of engagement with the same core content. The philosophical implications of glitch-based gameplay raise questions about authorial intent versus player freedom, about whether games belong to their creators or to the communities that play them. Generation 1's glitches exist in a legal and ethical gray area, neither explicitly permitted nor truly forbidden, leaving players to make their own judgments about what constitutes legitimate play. This ambiguity has proven creatively productive, fostering experimentation and innovation that might not have emerged under more restrictive conditions. The preservation of these techniques ensures that future players can experience Generation 1 with the full knowledge accumulated over decades of community exploration. The games remain accessible through various means, from original cartridges to official re-releases to emulation, and the glitches work across all platforms. This accessibility means that the exploits documented today will remain relevant for as long as people continue playing these games, creating a form of immortality for community-discovered techniques. The badge system in Generation 1 contains statistical irregularities that extend beyond the boost glitch into the fundamental way badges affect Pokémon performance during battle. Each badge obtained from Kanto's gym leaders provides passive boosts to specific stats, but the implementation of these boosts creates unexpected interactions with temporary stat modifications. The Boulder badge from Brock increases attack, the Thunder badge from Lieutenant Surge boosts speed, the Soul badge from Koga enhances defense, and so on through all 8 badges. The game recalculates and reapplies these badge boosts whenever any stat-changing move is used, creating a cascading effect where single moves trigger multiple stat increases. This systematic reapplication means that using Sword's Dance, which should only raise attack by 2 stages, also triggers fresh calculations of all badge-based boosts, effectively granting additional small increases to every stat governed by a badge. The cumulative effect grows more pronounced as players collect more badges, with 8 badge holders receiving significantly more benefit from stat moves than players with fewer badges. This hidden scaling creates a subtle progression system where gym badges provide immediate benefits through enabling HM usage and granting respect from traded Pokémon, while also offering increasingly powerful passive combat bonuses. The mechanics governing how traded Pokémon respond to badges introduces another layer of complexity, as Pokémon received in trades only obey trainers who possess badges corresponding to their level thresholds. A level 25 traded Pokémon ignores commands from a trainer without sufficient badges, using random moves or refusing to act entirely. This obedience system creates a practical limit on how quickly players can progress using traded high-level Pokémon, forcing engagement with the gym challenge even for players who might otherwise skip it. The thresholds tied to specific badges create breakpoints where obtaining a new badge suddenly makes previously disobedient Pokémon cooperative. The dialogue in various locations throughout Kanto references Pokémon behaviors and world details that suggest a more complex ecosystem than the simple battle-focused gameplay represents. NPCs mention Pokémon theft, wild creatures damaging property, and trainers who treat their Pokémon poorly, hinting at social issues surrounding Pokémon ownership and training. These textual details create a world where Pokémon exist as more than battle participants, functioning as companions, workers, and sources of both joy and conflict within human society. The truck near the SS An stands as one of Generation 1's most famous myth generators, with countless players convinced that Mew or other rare Pokémon could be found by using strength on the vehicle. The truck's placement, accessible only through specific sequence-breaking techniques involving surf, made it feel like a reward for clever exploration. However, the truck contains nothing, serving no function beyond existing as environmental decoration. The myth persisted for years despite lack of evidence, fueled by playground rumors and the desire to believe that such an unusual object must serve some purpose. The creation and spread of the truck myth demonstrates how gaming communities generate and perpetuate misinformation through enthusiasm and wishful thinking. Players who successfully reached the truck through difficult sequence breaks felt invested in believing their effort had unlocked something meaningful, leading them to share false discoveries with friends. These false discoveries spread through word of mouth, becoming embedded in playground culture before the internet could quickly debunk them. The truck myth represents a particular moment in gaming history when information moved slowly enough for false rumors to establish themselves as common knowledge. The unused Safari Zone Pokémon data suggests that additional species were planned for inclusion in the Safari but were cut before implementation. References in the game's code point toward Pokémon that would have made the Safari more diverse but were removed for unknown reasons. The decision to cut these Pokémon might have been motivated by balancing concerns, as making too many rare species available in the Safari could have trivialized the challenge of completing the Pokédex. Alternatively, memory limitations might have forced the developers to reduce the Safari roster to make room for other features. The Safari Zone itself operates under unique catching mechanics that replace traditional battle weakening with bait and rock throwing, creating a probabilistic approach to capture where player skill has less impact than luck. The decision to implement these alternative mechanics reflects a desire to vary gameplay and prevent the Safari from feeling like yet another route with tall grass. However, the mechanics frustrated many players who found the random nature of Safari captures unsatisfying compared to the skill-based catching of normal routes. The limited step counter adds additional pressure, creating a time management element that transforms Safari exploration into a resource optimization puzzle. The way certain Pokémon types interact with moves in Generation 1 reveals inconsistencies that were later corrected in subsequent games. Psychic types, for example, have no effective counters due to a programming error that makes them immune to Ghost-type moves, despite those moves being described as super effective. The Bug-type moves available in Generation 1 are universally weak, ensuring that Bug types cannot effectively damage Psychic Pokémon, even though the type matchup should favor Bug. These oversights created a metagame where Psychic types dominated competitive play, with Pokémon like Alakazam and Mewtwo facing few effective counters. The Ghost-type immunity to normal and fighting moves works as intended, but the reverse immunity that should make normal types immune to Ghost moves was incorrectly implemented, allowing Ghost moves to affect normal types as neutral damage. This error, and combined with the Psychic immunity to Ghost, creates a type system where Ghost types struggle to find useful matchups despite their theoretically unique position. The low power of available Ghost-type moves compounds this problem, ensuring that even when type matchups favor Ghost Pokémon, they lack the offensive tools to capitalize on those advantages. The special stat in Generation 1 combines what would later become special attack and special defense into a single value, creating situations where Pokémon excel at both special offense and defense, or struggle with both. This unification makes specially oriented Pokémon like Alakazam overwhelmingly powerful, as their high special stat provides both devastating attacks and excellent resistance to special damage. Later generations split special into separate offensive and defensive stats, allowing for more nuanced specialization and creating opportunities for Pokémon to excel in one aspect of special combat while struggling in another. The critical hit calculation in Generation 1 uses base speed as the primary factor, making faster Pokémon significantly more likely to land critical hits than slower species. This system creates a compounding advantage for speed-focused Pokémon, which already benefit from moving first and now also score critical hits more frequently. The high critical hit rate on fast Pokémon makes defensive strategies less viable, as even defensive Pokémon with high HP can be rapidly worn down by critical hits that bypass stat modifications. The mechanic rewards offensive play and makes stall-oriented strategies risky against fast opponents. Certain moves in Generation 1 have secondary effects that trigger far more frequently than their described percentages suggest, creating situations where low probability effects occur with surprising regularity. Some moves with 10% chances of causing status conditions actually trigger those conditions 15 or 20% of the time due to rounding errors in the probability calculations. These discrepancies between described and actual effect rates create a subtle gap between player expectations and reality, where moves perform either better or worse than their descriptions suggest. The way experience gain is calculated creates significant differences in leveling speed between traded and original team Pokémon. Traded Pokémon gain 50% bonus experience from all battles, making them level significantly faster than Pokémon caught by the player. This boost was intended to compensate for the obedience issues that plague high-level traded Pokémon, giving them a leveling advantage that would help lower-level traded Pokémon catch up to the player's team. However, the combination of experience boost and obedience thresholds creates a strange dynamic where traded Pokémon are most useful when kept below the next obedience threshold, as leveling them past that point makes them disobedient until the next badge is obtained. The Fame Checker feature that would appear in later games has roots in Generation 1 NPC dialogue that references famous trainers and their accomplishments. Characters throughout Kanto mention the Elite Four members by name, discuss the champion's reputation, and reference legendary trainers from the past. These dialogues create a sense of history and established excellence that the player is working to join, positioning the championship as a meaningful achievement rather than simply the end of the game. The way NPCs discuss trainers and their Pokémon hints at a broader culture of battling that extends beyond the player's personal journey. The department store in Celadon offers items through a tiered floor system that gradually introduces more powerful and expensive products as players ascend through the building. The organization of items by floor creates a physical progression through the store that mirrors the player's progression through the game, with early floors offering basic supplies, while upper floors stock rare and valuable items. The rooftop vending machines provide drinks that can be traded to NPCs for TMs, creating a simple trade economy where relatively cheap drinks convert into valuable moves. The way certain trainers are positioned creates unavoidable battles that force players to engage with specific challenges. These mandatory encounters teach battle mechanics and type matchups in controlled scenarios, ensuring that players cannot progress without demonstrating basic competence. The placement of these trainers also controls game pacing, creating natural breaks in exploration where players must pause and battle rather than rushing through areas. These design decisions reflect an understanding that players might skip optional content if given the choice, requiring mandatory checkpoints to ensure everyone experiences core gameplay elements. The naming system for player character, rival, and Pokémon allows for personalization, but also creates opportunities for inappropriate or juvenile names that the developers could not fully prevent. The character limit on names and the available character set constrain what players can input, but creative players find ways to create crude or offensive names within those limits. Later games would implement filtering systems to prevent certain combinations, but Generation 1 lacks such protections, allowing players complete freedom in naming. The way route design guides and player movement creates a carefully controlled exploration experience that feels open while actually being quite linear. Obstacles like ledges that can only be jumped down, trainers blocking paths, and HM requirements create a sequence of gates that open as the player progresses. This guided exploration prevents players from reaching late-game areas unprepared while maintaining the illusion of freedom to explore wherever one wishes. The design philosophy balances player agency with developer-controlled progression, creating a structure that supports players without making them feel constrained. The distribution of Pokémon across routes creates distinct ecosystems where specific species dominate particular environments. Water routes contain primarily water-type Pokémon, caves house rock and ground types, and forests attract bug types, creating logical biomes that make environmental sense. This distribution teaches players to expect certain encounters in certain locations, building pattern recognition that helps them prepare appropriate team members for upcoming areas. The consistency of these ecosystems makes the occasional surprise encounter more impactful, as unexpected Pokémon in unusual locations feel genuinely rare and special. The level curve across routes and gyms creates a gradually increasing challenge that should keep player teams appropriately leveled through natural progression. However, players who catch and train large numbers of Pokémon often find themselves underleveled compared to the intended curve, as experience is divided among team members. Conversely, players who focus on training a small core team often exceed the level curve significantly, making later challenges trivial. This variability in player experience reflects the difficulty of balancing an RPG where players have significant control over their approach to progression. The Pokémon storage system, accessed through Bill's PC after helping him return to human form, provides essential functionality for managing large collections of Pokémon beyond the 6-member party limit. The organization of boxes and the manual nature of transferring Pokémon between boxes creates a somewhat tedious management experience that later games would streamline. However, the requirement to actively organize and move Pokémon encourages players to think carefully about team composition and which Pokémon to keep readily accessible versus storing for later use. The way legendary Pokémon are integrated into the world as catchable encounters rather than storyline gifts reflects a design philosophy where player agency and exploration are rewarded. Finding and catching legendary birds requires discovering their hidden locations and successfully defeating them in battle, creating earned victories rather than guaranteed acquisitions. This approach makes legendary Pokémon feel more valuable, as their capture represents skill and dedication rather than simple story progression. The decision to make legendary Pokémon available before becoming champion allows players to use these powerful creatures during their challenge run rather than only accessing them in post-game content. This choice prioritizes player enjoyment over strict balance, acknowledging that using powerful Pokémon is fun and that players should be able to experience that fun during the main story, rather than waiting until afterward. The placement of legendary Pokémon in optional areas ensures that players who want a traditional challenge can ignore them, while those who prefer using powerful teams can seek them out. The Mewtwo encounter in Cerulean Cave represents the post-game capstone challenge, accessible only after becoming champion and demonstrating mastery of the game's systems. The placement of the strongest Pokémon in the game behind this significant gate creates a sense of earned reward, where players must prove themselves worthy before gaining access. The level of Mewtwo and the power of its moves ensure that the encounter feels appropriately climactic, serving as a final test of the player's preparation and battle skills. The way the narrative treats the player character's journey, from beginning trainer to champion, creates a classic hero's journey structure where growth and achievement are central themes. Starting with a single Pokémon and building a team capable of defeating the Elite Four provides a clear progression arc that gives meaning to intermediate challenges. Each gym badge represents a milestone in this journey, marking concrete progress toward the ultimate goal of becoming champion. This narrative structure, while simple, effectively motivates player engagement and provides satisfaction through achievement. The rival character serves as a measuring stick for player progress, consistently appearing with a team slightly stronger than what the player might naturally possess at each encounter. This design ensures that rival battles provide appropriate challenge without becoming impossible, creating memorable obstacles that test the player's current strength. The evolution of the rival's team as the game progresses demonstrates parallel growth, suggesting that the rival is training and improving just as the player is, creating a sense of competitive relationship that drives both characters forward. The way NPCs reference the rival and his accomplishments creates a persistent competitive narrative where the player is constantly compared to their childhood friend turned rival. Characters mention the rival's successes, note when he has recently passed through an area, and comment on his skills as a trainer. These references ensure the rivalry remains relevant even when the rival is not physically present, maintaining narrative tension throughout the journey. The revelation that the rival has become champion before the player arrives at the Elite Four creates a final twist that elevates the ultimate battle from defeating a stranger to overcoming someone the player has competed with throughout the entire journey. The environmental storytelling in Lavender Town creates an atmosphere of grief and loss without extensive dialogue or cutscenes. The music, the graveyard setting, and the morning NPCs combine to establish tone through ambient details rather than explicit narration. This approach to storytelling respects player intelligence and allows for emotional engagement without forcing specific interpretations. Players can experience the sadness of the location and understand its significance without having every detail explained through text. The Sylph Co building serves as a major dungeon representing corporate infiltration by Team Rocket, creating a scenario where the player must navigate a hostile-controlled building to rescue it from criminal occupation. The warp tile puzzles create a navigation challenge that requires mapping and experimentation to solve, rewarding players who carefully track their movements. The combination of trainers, puzzles, and the climactic Giovanni encounter makes Sylph Co one of Generation 1's most elaborate and memorable dungeons. The way Team Rocket is portrayed as incompetent yet threatening creates a tonal balance where they serve as credible obstacles without becoming truly frightening antagonists. The organization's schemes are ambitious, but their execution is flawed, creating opportunities for a young trainer to disrupt their plans repeatedly. This portrayal makes the player feel heroic without requiring the narrative to become overly dark or violent, maintaining the game's family-friendly tone while still providing meaningful conflict. The post-game content in Generation 1 is relatively minimal compared to later entries in the series, consisting primarily of Cerulean Cave and the challenge of completing the Pokédex. This limited post-game reflects the development priorities and cartridge limitations of the Game Boy era, where creating extensive content beyond the main story would have required resources that simply were not available. The focus remained on creating a complete and satisfying main journey, rather than extensive replay value through post-game activities. The trading economy that developed among players created social dynamics around rare Pokémon and version exclusives, with playground negotiations establishing informal exchange rates for different species. Pokémon like Alakazam and Gengar, requiring trades to obtain, became valuable trading commodities. Children developed an understanding of value and exchange through these negotiations, learning to assess relative worth and make deals that satisfied both parties. This emergent social structure around Pokémon trading contributed to the series' popularity by creating reasons for players to interact and collaborate. The link cable technology that enabled trading and battling between Game Boys represented a significant technical achievement for the time, allowing direct communication between handheld devices without external infrastructure. The cable created a physical connection that made the social aspects of Pokémon trading tangible, as players literally linked their games together. This physicality made trades feel more significant than they might have in a purely digital exchange system, adding ceremony and importance to the act of swapping Pokémon. The way the game tracks Pokédex completion through seen and caught categories creates a distinction between encountering a Pokémon and actually capturing it. This system allows players to work toward completion by battling trainers who use Pokémon the player has not caught, filling in Pokédex entries without requiring capture of every species. The Scene category serves as a progress tracker that shows how close a player is to true completion, providing intermediate goals beyond simply catching everything. The TM system in Generation 1 treats technical machines as single-use items, creating tough decisions about which Pokémon should learn each valuable move. This permanent consumption forces players to carefully consider their choices, as using Earthquake TM on one Pokémon means no other team member can learn it through that method. Later games would make TMs reusable, eliminating this tension, but also removing a source of meaningful decision-making. The single-use nature of Generation 1 TMs creates a sense of permanent commitment that makes team building feel more consequential. The HM system creates a separate category of moves that Pokémon can learn but cannot forget through normal means, requiring specific NPCs to delete HM moves. This restriction ensures that players cannot accidentally strand themselves by forgetting crucial field moves, but it also creates situations where Pokémon become permanently burdened with suboptimal moves. The tension between needing HM moves for exploration and wanting optimized battle movesets leads to the creation of dedicated HM users, Pokémon whose primary purpose is field utility rather than combat effectiveness. The way different Pokémon learn different moves through leveling creates distinct identities and roles for each species. Two Pokémon of the same type might have completely different move pools, making them useful in different situations despite sharing defensive characteristics. This variation prevents type from being the only relevant factor in team building, requiring players to consider individual Pokémon strengths and available moves. The depth of these differences rewards players who study move lists and plan their team composition carefully. The version-exclusive Pokémon mechanic creates an artificial scarcity that drives trading between players who own different versions. Species available in red cannot be caught in blue, and vice versa, ensuring that completing the Pokédex requires either trading with other players or owning both versions. This design decision prioritized social interaction and created reasons for players to maintain connections with friends who owned the opposite version. The version exclusivity also contributed to sales, as dedicated players often purchased both versions to ensure complete Pokédex access. The way gym leaders specialize in specific types creates predictable challenges that allow for strategic preparation. Players know before entering each gym what type of Pokémon they will face, enabling them to catch and train appropriate counters. This transparency respects player time and agency, ensuring that preparation and planning are rewarded rather than punished. The type specialization also creates clear identities for each gym leader, making them memorable characters, defined by their chosen type. The Elite Four and Champion serve as the ultimate test of team balance and coverage, requiring players to handle multiple types consecutively without opportunity to heal between battles. The need to succeed in 5 consecutive battles forces players to build teams capable of handling diverse threats rather than specializing too narrowly. This endurance challenge creates tension and stakes that a single battle could not provide, making victory over the Elite Four feel earned through comprehensive preparation. The way status conditions persist outside of battle in Generation 1 creates long-term consequences for taking damage or being afflicted during exploration. Poisoned Pokémon lose HP while walking, creating urgency to find healing or reach a Pokémon Center before the Pokémon faints. This mechanical pressure makes status conditions feel more dangerous and significant than they would if effects disappeared after battle, adding a resource management element to exploration. The decision to allow players to save anywhere creates flexibility, but also introduces potential soft locks where players save in unwinnable positions. The game includes few protections against players creating impossible situations through poor save timing, trusting players to manage their own save strategy. This trust respects player agency, but can create frustration when poor decisions lead to lost progress. The hidden power values that would later become known as individual values determine each Pokémon's stat growth, creating variation between individuals of the same species. Two Pikachu caught at the same level might have different stats due to these hidden values, making some individuals objectively stronger than others. This system adds depth to the catching mechanics, as players seeking optimal team members must catch multiple specimens of each species and compare their stats. The randomness of these values ensures that every caught Pokémon is unique, creating a sense that each individual creature has its own identity beyond just its species. The way certain Pokémon sprites were adjusted between the Japanese and international releases reveals localization decisions aimed at making creatures more appealing to Western audiences. Some sprites were completely redrawn to appear cuter or less intimidating, reflecting different aesthetic preferences between Japanese and international markets. These changes affected how players perceived certain Pokémon, with some species becoming more iconic in their international forms despite the original Japanese designs being quite different. The sound design throughout Kanto creates memorable audio signatures for different locations and situations, with each town having distinct music that establishes the atmosphere. Lavender Town's unsettling theme contrasts sharply with Pallet Town's gentle melody, using music to reinforce the emotional tone of each location. The battle music increases in complexity and intensity for more significant fights, with gym leaders, rivals, and legendary encounters each having unique themes that elevate their importance. This musical variety prevents audio fatigue and helps players navigate the world through sound as much as visual cues. The way Pokémon cries were generated through the Game Boy's limited sound channels resulted in distinctive vocalizations that, while simple, became indelibly associated with each species. The hardware constraints forced creative solutions that produced memorable results, with some cries being pitched versions of others, or combinations of existing sounds. The lo-fi quality of these cries contributed to Generation 1's unique audio identity, creating an aesthetic that later games would reference even when working with more advanced sound hardware. The choice to make certain Pokémon like Eevee gifts from NPCs rather than wild encounters creates special moments where players receive unique creatures without the randomness of wild catching. These gift Pokémon often come with backstory or context that makes them feel more significant than creatures simply found in tall grass. The Eevee received in Celadon City, for example, arrives as a thoughtful present rather than a battle trophy, creating a different relationship between trainer and Pokémon from the outset. The daycare system introduces breeding mechanics in a primitive form, allowing players to deposit Pokémon for leveling, but not yet enabling egg production that would define later games' breeding systems. The passive leveling provides a way to train Pokémon without active grinding, though at the cost of missing any moves learned during the daycare period. This trade-off between convenience and control reflects the game's general philosophy of offering players choices with meaningful consequences. The famed checker concept that would appear in later games has its roots in how Generation 1 NPCs discuss famous trainers and their accomplishments, creating a sense that the player's achievements are being noticed and discussed throughout Kanto. The way characters reference the player's badge count or mention hearing about a talented trainer creates a narrative of growing reputation that parallels mechanical progression. This attention to the player's rising fame adds narrative weight to mechanical achievements, making gym victories feel important not just for unlocking new abilities, but for establishing the player's place in Kanto's training culture. The design of Pokémon Center healing stations as free, unlimited resources eliminates resource management anxiety and ensures players can always recover between challenges. This generous design philosophy prioritizes player experience over difficulty, recognizing that forced resource scarcity creates frustration rather than engagement. The instant, complete healing provided by centers creates natural breakpoints in gameplay, where players can reorganize teams and prepare for upcoming challenges without worrying about conserving healing items. The way certain routes contain trainers who can be battled repeatedly if the player blacks out and respawns creates opportunities for grinding experience and money. These renewable resources ensure that players who struggle with upcoming challenges can always fall back to earlier areas to strengthen their teams. The respawning trainers after defeat mechanics create a safety net that prevents players from becoming completely stuck, though it also means that failure carries limited consequences beyond lost time. The placement of rare candy items throughout the world provides alternative leveling options for players who want to quickly boost specific Pokémon. The scarcity of these items creates decisions about which Pokémon to use them on, similar to the TM conservation decisions. The ability to bypass level grinding entirely for chosen Pokémon demonstrates the developer's understanding that not all players enjoy repetitive battles, offering shortcuts for those who prioritize story progression over mechanical engagement. The Nugget Bridge sequence creates a gauntlet of battles culminating in a Team Rocket recruitment attempt, introducing the criminal organization through personal interaction rather than abstract villainy. The bridge serves as an early test of endurance battling, requiring players to succeed in multiple consecutive fights without healing. The Nugget reward creates a clear incentive to attempt the challenge, while the Team Rocket encounter adds narrative context to the mechanical trial. The way wild Pokémon flee from battle introduces an element of urgency to catching attempts, particularly with rare species that might escape before capture succeeds. The flee mechanic prevents players from taking unlimited time to weaken wild Pokémon, creating pressure to make efficient catching attempts. Species with high flee rates become notably more difficult to catch, requiring quick decision-making and sometimes luck to secure before they vanish. The Super Rod, Good Rod, and Old Rod tier system creates progression in fishing mechanics, with better rods accessing superior Pokémon. This equipment-based advancement parallels other forms of progression while adding variety to encounter methods. The requirement to obtain better rods from specific NPCs creates mini-quests scattered throughout the world, rewarding exploration with improved tools. The way certain areas become accessible only after obtaining specific HMs creates a web of connected spaces that gradually opens as the player progresses. This gating system controls exploration flow while maintaining the illusion of a continuous world where all locations exist simultaneously. The satisfaction of returning to previously inaccessible areas with newly acquired abilities rewards player memory and creates a sense of world mastery. The Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island contains environmental storytelling through journal entries describing Mewtwo's creation, providing lore without requiring direct NPC exposition. The abandoned, burned building creates an atmosphere of tragedy and failed ambition with the journal fragments serving as archaeological evidence of catastrophic events. This approach to narrative delivery respects player agency by allowing those interested in lore to engage deeply while permitting story-focused players to simply navigate the dungeon for progression. The Seafoam Islands present a boulder-pushing puzzle that demonstrates the potential for environmental challenges beyond simple navigation and battling. The requirement to manipulate the environment to progress creates a different type of engagement that breaks up the rhythm of route exploration and trainer battles. The puzzle difficulty strikes a balance between being challenging enough to require thought while remaining solvable through experimentation for players without guides. The way Victory Road serves as a final gauntlet before the Elite Four creates a climactic dungeon that tests all abilities accumulated throughout the journey. The need to use multiple HMs, navigate complex geography, and battle strong trainers creates a comprehensive challenge that functions as a final exam before the championship. The placement of high-level wild Pokémon creates opportunities for last-minute team adjustments and training, ensuring players have every chance to optimize their teams before the ultimate challenge. The Unknown Dungeon, later known as Cerulean Cave, remains locked until post-game completion, creating a clear dividing line between main story content and optional exploration. The placement of Mewtwo and high-level wild Pokémon in this final area rewards thorough exploration with gameplay that extends beyond the championship. The dungeon's confusing layout and powerful encounters ensure that even champion-level trainers face meaningful challenges, preventing the post-game from feeling trivial. The way Pokémon stats are displayed through relatively simple numerical values creates accessibility while hiding complex underlying calculations. Players can understand that higher numbers mean better performance without needing to comprehend damage formulas or stat calculation algorithms. This surface-level simplicity with mechanical depth beneath allows casual players to engage without overwhelming detail while providing advanced players with systems to analyze and optimize. The Evolution Stone availability and location creates scarcity that forces planning around which Pokémon to evolve and when. The limited supply of certain stones means players cannot evolve every compatible Pokémon without trade or careful conservation. This resource scarcity creates meaningful choices about team composition and evolution timing, preventing players from simply evolving everything immediately upon access. The way legendary bird placement rewards exploration of optional areas reinforces the value of thorough world investigation. Finding Articuno in Seafoam Islands, Zapdos in the power plant, and Moltres in Victory Road requires players to engage with locations they might otherwise skip or rush through. The legendaries serve as tangible rewards for curiosity and persistence, providing powerful team members for players willing to explore beyond the critical path. The Mew distribution, through official events rather than in-game availability, created artificial scarcity that made the Pokémon particularly desirable. The impossibility of legitimately obtaining Mew through normal gameplay transformed it into a mythological creature that inspired playground myths and trading schemes. This event-exclusive distribution model would define how mythical Pokémon were handled throughout the series, creating a tier above legendary for creatures that could only be obtained through limited-time promotions. The way experience requirements scale for different Pokémon creates variation in how quickly different species level up and evolve. Some Pokémon reach evolution relatively quickly, while others require extensive grinding to achieve their final forms. This variation creates natural pacing differences, where some team members grow rapidly while others demand sustained investment. The delayed gratification of finally evolving a slow-growing Pokémon creates satisfaction proportional to the effort required. The friendship mechanic that would become central to later generations exists in primitive form through Pikachu in yellow version, though without the mechanical depth of later implementations. Pikachu's happiness affects how it behaves in certain situations, creating a relationship simulation that hints at mechanics that would be fully developed in Gold and Silver. The animated Pikachu following the player character provides visual feedback on this relationship, making the bond feel tangible rather than abstract. The way wild Pokémon levels scale with area progression creates a natural difficulty curve that guides players through Kanto in a specific sequence. Early routes feature weak creatures, while later areas contain powerful Pokémon, creating implicit suggestions about intended progression order. Players who venture into high-level areas prematurely find themselves facing Pokémon far beyond their current strength, creating natural boundaries that discourage sequence breaking without explicitly preventing it. The distribution of item shops throughout Kanto creates economic access points where players convert money into resources. The varying inventories between shops reflect regional specialization and progression gating, with more advanced items available only in later game locations. This geographical distribution of goods creates reasons to revisit earlier towns and ensures players cannot access endgame items too early through simple economic means. The way fishing encounters vary based on location creates specialized aquatic ecosystems separate from the land-based route distributions. Different water routes contain different Pokémon, making fishing a distinct form of exploration that rewards players who engage with every body of water. The variation in fishing encounters ensures that water routes feel different from each other, rather than featuring identical Pokémon lists. The fossil selection in Mount Moon creates an early game binary choice with long-term consequences, as players can only obtain one of the two fossil Pokémon without trading. The permanence of this choice adds weight to what might otherwise be a trivial decision, forcing players to commit to either Omanite or Kabuto without the option to change their mind. The fossil revival system on Cinnabar Island creates a delayed payoff for this early choice, transforming an ancient artifact into a living Pokémon hours after the initial selection. The way certain Pokémon appear only in specific versions creates trading requirements beyond evolution-based needs, ensuring that completing the Pokédex demands interaction with players who own the opposite version. Version-exclusive species like Sandshrew and Akins in red versus Sandslash and Arbok in blue double the number of Pokémon that cannot be obtained solo, making trading essential for completion rather than merely convenient. The Cerulean Gym's positioning after Mount Moon creates a difficulty spike, where players fresh from the cave may find their teams poorly suited to battling water types. The potential for players to struggle at this early checkpoint teaches the importance of team diversity and type coverage. The optional nature of certain early game captures means some players reach Misty with teams weak to water, creating a learning moment about the value of maintaining balanced team composition. The Bike Voucher quest creates a trading chain where helping one NPC leads to receiving an item that must be delivered to another character for the actual reward. This multi-step side quest structure would become a recurring design pattern in later games, but it first appears here as a simple sequence requiring players to pay attention to NPC dialogue and remember quest objectives across locations. The way Master Ball availability as a single, irreplaceable item creates a high-stakes decision about which Pokémon deserves this guaranteed capture. The permanence of using the Master Ball ensures players cannot casually spend it, forcing careful consideration about whether a particular encounter warrants its use. The scarcity transforms the Master Ball into a symbolic representation of the single most important catch in the player's journey. The Pokémon League structure, as a gauntlet of 5 consecutive battles, creates a climactic challenge that tests team depth and resource management. The inability to leave and heal between fights forces players to build teams capable of handling extended combat scenarios rather than specializing for single battles. This endurance test creates tension and stakes that make victory over the Elite Four feel earned through comprehensive preparation and careful play. The sprite animations during battle, while limited by Game Boy hardware, create visual feedback that makes combat feel dynamic despite the turn-based nature. Pokémon shaking when taking damage, the flash effects of critical hits, and the screen animations for different moves all contribute to making battles feel active rather than purely menu-driven. These small touches add personality to combat encounters and prevent battles from becoming purely abstract number calculations. The way poison damage ticks while walking creates a resource drain that adds tension to exploration far from healing points. Watching a Pokemon's HP gradually decrease with each step forces players to make decisions about whether to continue exploring or retreat to safety. This environmental pressure from status conditions makes them feel more significant than they would if effects only mattered during battle. The Professor Oak evaluation system that checks Pokédex completion at various points creates milestone moments where players receive recognition for their collection efforts. Oak's commentary on captured Pokémon provides narrative acknowledgement of player achievements outside the main story progression. These evaluation points create natural breakpoints to assess progress toward the long-term goal of Pokédex completion. The way certain NPCs provide hints about upcoming challenges or hidden secrets creates an embedded hint system for players willing to thoroughly explore and talk to everyone. Careful attention to dialogue reveals useful information about type matchups, hidden items, and optimal strategies. This organic information delivery respects player agency by offering help without forcing it, allowing those who want assistance to find it, while permitting others to discover things independently. The town map item provides a geographical overview that helps players understand Kanto's layout and plan their next destination. The ability to view the entire region at once creates spatial awareness that enhances the sense of exploring a cohesive world. The map's indication of the player's current location helps prevent getting lost, while still requiring players to navigate without constant hand-holding. The way HM requirements gate progression creates a skill tree effect where obtaining new abilities unlocks new areas. This progression system ties mechanical advancement to geographical expansion, creating a sense that growing stronger directly translates to accessing more of the world. The satisfaction of returning to previously blocked areas with newly acquired HMs rewards players for remembering earlier obstacles. The Sylph Scope serves as a narrative key that unlocks the ghost encounters in Pokémon Tower, creating a quest structure where players must complete one challenge to access another. This chaining of objectives creates flow through different areas of Kanto while maintaining narrative cohesion. The Ghost Marowak encounter becomes more impactful because of the effort required to reach it, transforming a simple battle into a meaningful story moment. The way Team Rocket members use predominantly poison-type Pokémon creates a thematic consistency that makes the organization feel cohesive. The poisonous nature of their Pokémon choices parallels their role as corrupting influences in Kanto's society. This thematic alignment between character role and Pokémon choice demonstrates attention to narrative detail that enriches the world. The nugget item's primary value as a sellable commodity for money rather than a consumable resource creates many treasures scattered throughout Kanto. Finding nuggets provides immediate economic benefit without requiring decisions about when to use limited items. The Nugget Bridge reward of a nugget for defeating multiple trainers creates a concrete payout for the challenge beyond just experience and progression. The way certain moves have drastically different power levels creates a clear hierarchy of offensive options that guides player decision-making. Weak early game moves like tackle and scratch become obsolete as stronger attacks become available, creating natural upgrade paths. The replacement of weak moves with stronger alternatives provides tangible evidence of progression beyond just stat increases. The PP system for move usage creates resource management within individual battles, preventing infinite repetition of powerful moves. The need to conserve PP during long dungeon exploration adds strategic depth to move selection, as players must balance using powerful attacks against preserving them for important encounters. The PP restoration through Pokémon Centers ensures this resource management never becomes permanently limiting, resetting with each heal. The way Pokémon switching operates through a free action mechanic creates strategic depth in competitive battles, as switching in response to opponent moves can negate type disadvantages. The ability to see opponent Pokémon before choosing attacks or switches creates a mini-game of prediction and counter-prediction. This strategic layer transforms battles from simple damage races into psychological contests of anticipating opponent actions. The toxic status condition's escalating damage creates a powerful stall tool that becomes increasingly deadly over time. The exponential growth of poison damage from toxic makes it far more dangerous than regular poison, creating meaningful distinction between different sources of the same status condition. The strategic application of toxic in combination with defensive plays creates viable battle strategies focused on patience rather than aggression. The way stab, or same type attack bonus, increases damage when Pokémon use moves matching their types creates incentives to maintain type consistency in movesets. This bonus damage makes specialized type-focused strategies more effective than generalist approaches in many situations. The stab system creates natural synergy between a Pokémon's type and its optimal moveset, guiding player decisions about which moves to teach. The breeding mechanics that would define later games exist in Generation 1 only through the Ditto transformation glitch, where very specific conditions allow Pokémon to duplicate through unintended interactions. This primitive and glitch-based reproduction highlights how early Generation 1 was in the series' development, with core systems that would later be fundamental still not yet conceived. The way trait evolutions create social dependencies transforms Pokémon from a purely solo experience to a fundamentally communal one. The impossibility of obtaining certain Pokémon without trading forces players to build relationships and negotiate exchanges. This social design creates memories and stories beyond individual playthroughs, as trading sessions become shared experiences that bond players through cooperation. The limited bag space forces players to make decisions about which items to carry and which to store or discard. This inventory management creates a light survival element where resource scarcity and carrying capacity must be balanced. The tension between wanting to carry multiple types of Pokeballs, healing items, and key items while respecting bag limits creates constant small optimization decisions. The way gym leader rematches are impossible in Generation 1 creates a one-time only nature to gym battles that makes them feel more significant. The inability to repeatedly challenge gym leaders for experience or enjoyment means each battle must count, creating pressure to succeed on the first attempt. This permanence makes gym victories feel more meaningful as unique accomplishments rather than repeatable events. The secret techniques that NPCs reference but never teach create a sense that the world contains knowledge beyond what the player can access. References to rare moves or secret training methods hint at a broader battling culture where master trainers possess skills the player has not yet learned. These textual hints at unreachable knowledge create mystery and depth without requiring implementation of the referenced content. The way certain areas like the Safari Zone and the Game Corner represent luxury activities that wealthy trainers might enjoy, creates subtle world building about Kanto's economy and social structure. These recreational spaces suggest that not all trainer activity revolves around battling and badges, with some pursuits being purely entertainment focused. The existence of these locations adds texture to Kanto by showing different aspects of how people and Pokémon coexist. The old amber fossil's unique status as an item obtained from a specific NPC rather than chosen from multiple options creates a sense that Aerodactyl is special among the fossil Pokémon. The gift nature of the amber makes obtaining Aerodactyl feel like a reward for thorough exploration rather than the result of a binary choice. This distinction sets Aerodactyl apart from Omanite and Kabuto narratively, even though mechanically they all function similarly. As the final moments drift by, the obscure facts of Generation 1 reveal themselves not as isolated curiosities, but as windows into design philosophies and development constraints that shaped one of gaming's most influential titles. The glitches emerged from hardware limitations and ambitious programming that pushed the Game Boy to its limits. The social mechanics grew from a desire to create shared experiences that extended beyond individual cartridges. The hidden dialogues and cut content whisper stories of features planned but unrealized, compromises made in pursuit of shipping a complete game on limited hardware. The 3 events in Oak's laboratory, the unused yellow version cutscene code, the save corruption glitch for obtaining multiple starters, each represents a different facet of how Generation 1 was constructed and deconstructed by its community. The developers created systems that functioned well enough for normal play, while containing exploitable edge cases that dedicated players would discover and document over decades. The resulting game exists in dual form, as both the intended experience and as a platform for creative manipulation through glitches and sequence breaks. These obscure details collectively paint a picture of a game that succeeded despite its rough edges, or perhaps because of them. The imperfections created opportunities for discovery, for community knowledge sharing, for the construction of shared mythology around trucks and Muse and impossible encounters. The generations that followed would be more polished, more balanced, more carefully tested. But Generation 1 remains special precisely because of its willingness to be imperfect, its creation during a moment when Pokémon was still experimental and unproven. The quiet details hidden in code, accessible only through specific player actions or data mining decades after release, demonstrate that even the most thoroughly explored games still contain secrets. The dedication of communities to uncover every hidden element, to document every glitch, to preserve knowledge about execution techniques, speaks to the enduring appeal of these early games. Generation 1's rough charm and exploitable systems created a foundation that players continue to examine and celebrate long after more advanced entries have released. The internal battle mechanics that govern damage calculation contain several quirks that affect competitive play in ways most casual players never discover. The random damage variance that applies to every attack creates a 15% range where identical moves under identical conditions can produce different damage values. This randomness ensures that no battle outcome is perfectly predictable, introducing an element of uncertainty that prevents perfect strategic calculation. The variance range means that attacks can occasionally deal more or less damage than expected, creating moments where seemingly guaranteed knockouts fail or unexpected survivals occur. The way critical hits bypass stat modifications creates a mechanic that punishes defensive strategies relying on stat boosts. A Pokémon that has used multiple defense-boosting moves still takes full damage from critical hits, as the damage calculation ignores defensive stat stages entirely. This mechanic prevents stalling strategies from becoming completely invincible ensuring that offensive play remains viable even against heavily fortified opponents. The bypass effect makes critical hits particularly valuable in competitive play, where stat manipulation forms a core component of many strategies. The type effectiveness chart in Generation 1 contains several errors and oversights that create unintuitive interactions. Psychic type's immunity to Ghost moves despite Ghost being listed as super effective represents the most significant oversight, fundamentally altering the type balance. The bug type's weakness and limited move pool renders it largely ineffective against psychic types, despite theoretical advantages. These errors create a metagame where psychic dominance goes largely unchecked by intended counters, leading to an unbalanced competitive environment. The way paralysis reduces speed by 75% creates a status condition with massive strategic value beyond the chance to prevent actions entirely. A paralyzed fast Pokémon often becomes slower than previously slower opponents, completely reversing turn order and allowing defensive Pokémon to move first. This speed manipulation creates additional strategic depth to paralysis beyond simple action prevention, making it valuable even against opponents with high paralysis resistance. The combination of speed reduction and action prevention makes paralysis arguably the most powerful status condition for disrupting opponent strategies. The confusion status effect operates as a semi-random self-harm mechanic that can cause battles to swing unpredictably. Confused Pokémon have a 50% chance each turn to damage themselves instead of executing their chosen action, creating volatile situations where outcomes depend heavily on luck. The self-damage from confusion uses the Pokémon's own attack stat, meaning high-attack Pokémon can severely injure themselves while confused. This scaling damage makes confusion particularly dangerous for physically oriented Pokémon that might knock themselves out through repeated self-harm. The sleep mechanics in Generation 1 are notably unbalanced compared to later games, as sleeping Pokémon cannot wake up on the turn they fall asleep, effectively guaranteeing multiple free turns for the opponent. The sleep duration varies randomly between 1 and 7 turns, creating significant variance in how impactful sleep moves become. A Pokémon sleeping for 1 turn suffers minimal disruption, while one sleeping 7 turns effectively becomes unusable for a large portion of the battle. This randomness makes sleep-based strategies inconsistent but potentially devastating. The badge boost mechanics create hidden advantages that accumulate as players progress through gyms. Each badge provides a 12.5% boost to specific stats, with these bonuses applying passively in all battles. The Soul Badge increases defense, the Thunder Badge boosts speed, the Volcano Badge enhances special attack, and the Marsh Badge improves special defense. These passive bonuses create a growing power advantage over the course of the game, making later battles easier, even without active training. The glitch that reapplies these bonuses whenever stat moves are used compounds this advantage, creating situations where players with all 8 badges receive massive statistical benefits. The experience scaling system creates different leveling curves for different Pokémon, with some species reaching level 100 far faster than others. Fast experience growth, Pokémon like Magikarp level quickly, allowing them to evolve early and reach competitive strength rapidly. Medium and slow growth, Pokémon require significantly more total experience to reach the same levels, creating time investment differences that affect which Pokémon players choose to train. The diversity in experience requirements adds strategic consideration to team building, as fast leveling Pokémon provide quicker returns, while slow leveling ones demand patience. The way fleeing from wild battles is calculated based on speed stats creates situations where slower players often cannot escape from wild encounters. The flee calculation compares player and opponent speed, with faster wild Pokémon frequently preventing escape attempts. This mechanic makes navigating areas with high-level wild Pokémon dangerous, as players cannot reliably flee if their teams are underleveled. The repel items bypass this problem by preventing encounters entirely, making them valuable tools for traversing dangerous areas without unwanted battles. The encounter rate mechanics determine how frequently wild Pokémon appear, with different terrain types having different encounter frequencies. Tall grass has moderate encounter rates, while caves feature higher frequencies, creating areas where random battles become more frequent. The ability to manipulate encounter rates through player movement patterns creates opportunities for avoiding or seeking battles based on current needs. Players seeking experience can maximize encounters, while those wanting uninterrupted travel can minimize them through careful movement. The way money is obtained exclusively through trainer battles creates an economy where player wealth directly correlates with battle participation. Players who avoid optional trainer battles accumulate less money, potentially limiting their ability to purchase items and supplies. This economy encourages engaging with optional content by making it financially rewarding, creating alignment between exploration, thoroughness, and economic success. The money reward scaling with opponent level ensures that later game battles provide larger payouts, matching increased item costs. The price scaling of items creates a gradual introduction to the game's economy, with early purchases being cheap, while late game items cost substantially more. Basic Pokeballs sell for 200 currency, while more advanced balls cost significantly more, creating a tiered purchasing progression. The relatively high cost of healing items, compared to Pokemon Center healing, creates economic pressure to use free healing when possible, conserving money for permanent purchases like TMs and evolution stones. The way certain items like the bicycle and fishing rods are obtained through quests rather than purchases ensures all players access these tools regardless of economic status. This design choice prevents players from being locked out of essential items due to poor money management, ensuring core gameplay elements remain accessible. The gift nature of key items also creates narrative moments around their acquisition, transforming equipment upgrades into story events rather than mere transactions. The TM and HM distinction creates permanent versus consumable move categories, with HMs being reusable but mandatory for progression, while TMs offer powerful moves at the cost of single-use limitation. This division forces players to carefully consider TM allocation while ensuring critical field moves remain available. The permanent nature of HMs prevents players from accidentally making the game unwinnable by forgetting essential moves, though it also creates situations where HM moves consume valuable move slots. The Move Deleter NPC, who can remove HM moves, provides a safety valve for the permanent HM learning system, allowing players to eventually free move slots occupied by field moves. The placement of this NPC in a location requiring significant progression ensures players cannot remove HMs too early and accidentally block their own progress. This careful balance between permanence and eventual flexibility demonstrates thoughtful design around potentially problematic mechanics. The held item system that would define later games exists only in primitive form in Generation 1, where Pokémon cannot hold items during battle. This limitation simplifies battle mechanics by removing held item considerations from strategic planning. The absence of held items creates a more straightforward battle system focused on innate Pokémon characteristics rather than equipment optimization. Later games would add significant complexity through held items, creating builds and strategies impossible in Generation 1's simpler framework. The way certain Pokémon learn moves exclusive to their species creates unique identities beyond just type and stats. Moves like Fissure, Horn Drill and Guillotine exist only on specific Pokémon, making those species valuable for access to one-hit knockout moves. The distribution of exclusive moves creates niches where specific Pokémon become essential for certain strategies, preventing complete homogenization within type categories. This move exclusivity adds another layer to team building considerations beyond optimal stats. The stat experience system that underlies stat growth creates long-term benefits for Pokémon that battle extensively. Every defeated opponent contributes small amounts to hidden stat values that accumulate over time, making extensively trained Pokémon gradually stronger than freshly caught equivalents at the same level. This system rewards dedicated training while remaining invisible to players unfamiliar with underlying mechanics. The stat experience caps prevent unlimited growth, creating an upper limit where further training provides no additional benefit. The way wild Pokémon levels are distributed across areas creates natural level curves that guide player progression. Early routes feature low-level creatures, while areas accessible only later contain significantly stronger wild Pokémon. This distribution creates implicit difficulty tiers that suggest intended progression order without explicitly restricting player movement. Skilled players can venture into high-level areas early for powerful catches, while less experienced players naturally follow the level curve toward appropriately challenging content. The catch rate formula determines capture probability based on Pokémon health, status conditions, and ball type. The formula creates a strategic element to catching where weakening targets and applying status conditions significantly improves success chances. The variability in catch rates between species makes some Pokémon notably harder to capture than others, with legendary Pokémon having extremely low rates that make successful capture a significant achievement. The Master Ball, bypassing this formula, entirely makes it valuable for species with particularly frustrating catch rates. The way the AI selects moves during battle demonstrates relatively simple pattern recognition that players can exploit once understood. Computer opponents tend to favor super effective moves when available, creating predictable behaviors that skilled players can anticipate and counter. The AI's preference for offensive moves over status moves makes computer opponents less threatening than human players who might employ more sophisticated strategies. This AI simplicity makes the single-player campaign accessible, while ensuring competitive depth comes primarily from multiplayer battles. The trainer class system creates visual identities for different NPC opponent types, with each class having thematic Pokémon preferences. Bug catchers use bug types, swimmers favor water types, and channelers employ ghost and psychic types, creating predictable encounter compositions. This consistency helps players prepare appropriate counters and creates a sense that trainer classes represent specialized battling philosophies. The variety of trainer classes adds visual and strategic diversity to route exploration, preventing all NPC battles from feeling identical. The way certain locations, like Power Plant and Pokémon Mansion, serve as both dungeons and wild Pokémon habitats creates areas with dual purpose. These locations advance story objectives while providing access to rare Pokémon unavailable elsewhere, rewarding thorough exploration with unique catches. The combination of navigation challenges, trainer battles, and exclusive wild encounters makes these optional areas feel substantial and worthwhile rather than trivial side content. The environmental storytelling through building design and item placement creates narrative without explicit exposition. The burned Pokémon Mansion suggests tragedy through architecture alone, while the abandoned power plant implies industrial decline. These environmental details build a world that feels lived in and historically developed, creating atmosphere through visual design rather than dialogue. The subtle approach to environmental narrative respects player intelligence and allows those interested in lore to engage deeply while permitting story-focused players to simply enjoy the atmosphere. The music composition throughout Kanto creates audio signatures that become indelibly associated with specific locations and moments. The Pokémon Center theme provides comfort and safety. The cave theme creates tension through repetitive minimalist patterns, and the final battle music elevates the climactic encounter. This thoughtful audio design creates emotional associations with specific locations and situations, using sound to reinforce the intended feelings of different game moments. The limited sound channels available on Game Boy hardware forced creative composition techniques that produced memorable results despite technical constraints. The chiptune aesthetic that resulted from these limitations created a distinctive audio identity that remained recognizable decades later. The music's simple but effective melodies demonstrate how technical restrictions can inspire creative solutions that become definitive artistic choices. The way progression gates are distributed throughout Kanto creates a semi-linear path through an apparently open world. While players can theoretically explore in various orders, practical limitations through HM requirements and level scaling guide most players along similar routes. This guided freedom creates a sense of agency while ensuring players experience content in orders that maintain narrative and difficulty coherence. The balance between openness and structure represents careful design that respects player choice while preventing frustrating dead ends. The rival battle positioning throughout the game creates recurring checkpoints that test player progress and team strength. Each rival encounter features a team slightly ahead of where the player's team naturally would be, creating aspirational targets that encourage training and team improvement. The rivalry narrative gives these battles emotional weight beyond mechanical challenge, transforming them from generic trainer fights into personal contests with an established character. The way certain NPCs provide optional items or information demonstrates how side content rewards thorough exploration without being mandatory for progression. Players who talk to every character and search every location discover useful items and helpful hints, while those focused on main objectives can progress without exhaustive exploration. This optional reward structure respects different playstyles while incentivizing thoroughness for players who enjoy completionist approaches. The daycare couple who level Pokémon passively introduce a service economy where players can pay for training convenience. The cost scaling based on levels gained ensures the service remains expensive enough to prevent exploitation while offering value for players willing to pay for convenience. The passive nature of daycare training makes it useful for obtaining high-level Pokémon without active grinding, though at the cost of missing moves learned during daycare storage. The way fossils require revival through Cinnabar Island's laboratory creates a science fiction element where ancient creatures are resurrected through technology. This resurrection mechanic adds a paleontological dimension to the game world, suggesting that Pokémon once existed in eras long past and can be brought back through modern science. The revival process transforms inert items into living creatures, creating a sense of participating in scientific discovery. The Sylph Scope's function as a ghost-revealing device creates a tool that bridges the material and supernatural, allowing players to interact with otherwise intangible creatures. The scope's specific utility in Pokémon Tower makes it essential for progressing that storyline, tying equipment acquisition to narrative advancement. This connection between tools and story creates quest structures where obtaining specific items unlocks new content and narrative developments. The way the underground path tunnels provide shortcuts between cities creates fast travel options for players who have already explored surface routes. These tunnels reward players returning to earlier areas with quicker navigation options, reducing backtracking tedium. The underground aesthetic provides environmental variety while serving functional purposes, demonstrating how level design can be both practical and atmospheric. The item finder device helps locate hidden items scattered throughout Kanto, transforming invisible treasures into discoverable secrets. The need to actively use the item finder while exploring creates an engagement loop where thorough investigation rewards players with resources they might otherwise miss. The placement of hidden items encourages careful exploration while ensuring players without the item finder can still progress normally. The badge requirement system for HM usage creates artificial gates that prevent players from accessing certain abilities before achieving specific progression milestones. A player might possess Cut, but cannot use it outside battle without the Cascade badge from Misty, creating a lock and key structure through gym progression. This system ensures players cannot sequence break too severely while maintaining the illusion that abilities come from Pokémon rather than arbitrary trainer permissions. The stat modification moves that raise or lower stats during battle create setup opportunities where players sacrifice turns to gain long-term advantages. Moves like Sword's Dance double attack at the cost of a turn spent not attacking, creating risk-reward calculations around whether setup time will pay off before the battle ends. The ability to stack multiple stat modifications creates snowball potential where early setup investment leads to overwhelming battle advantages. The accuracy and evasion stats create additional layers to hit chance calculations beyond simple move accuracy. Moves that modify these stats can make Pokémon nearly impossible to hit or guarantee that their own attacks land consistently. The compounding effects of accuracy and evasion modifiers create volatile scenarios where battles can become one-sided through successful stat manipulation. The damage calculation formula that determines final damage from attacks incorporates attacker stats, defender stats, move power, type effectiveness, and random variance. This complex calculation creates nuanced interactions where changing any single factor can significantly alter outcomes. The mathematical depth underlying apparently simple attacks demonstrates the sophistication hidden within Generation 1's combat system. The special split that would occur in later generations combined offensive and defensive special stats into a single value in Generation 1. This unification created Pokémon that excelled at both special offense and defense, or struggled with both, preventing nuanced specialization. The later split into distinct special attack and special defense stats allowed for more varied stat distributions and strategic options. The physical special split in Generation 1 operates by type rather than by move, meaning all fire moves are special and all fighting moves are physical, regardless of move characteristics. This system creates situations where Pokémon with high attack stats cannot effectively use their own type moves if those moves are categorized as special. The type-based split limits strategic options and creates counterintuitive scenarios where physical Pokémon use special type moves ineffectively. The evolutionary stones serve as instant evolution triggers that bypass the normal leveling process, allowing players to evolve compatible Pokémon at any point. This flexibility creates strategic decisions about when to evolve stone evolution Pokémon, as delaying evolution allows access to moves that evolved forms might not learn. The trade-off between immediate power through evolution and delayed power through superior move pools creates meaningful choices around stone usage timing. The Moonstone's relative scarcity compared to other evolutionary stones makes it a particularly valuable resource for players wanting to evolve multiple Moonstone-dependent Pokémon. Species like Clefairy, Jigglypuff, Nidorina, and Nidorino all require Moonstones, creating competition for limited resources. This scarcity forces players to prioritize which Pokémon to evolve first creating another layer of resource management beyond simple money and item availability. The Thunderstone, Firestone, Waterstone, and Leafstone have broader availability, but still require acquisition through specific means rather than unlimited purchase. The placement of these stones as hidden items or shop purchases creates progression gates where players gain access to evolution options as they advance through Kanto. The controlled distribution ensures that stone evolutions feel earned rather than trivially available from the beginning. The way certain Pokémon have multiple evolution paths creates branching choices where a single base form can become different final forms. Eevee represents the most extreme version, with 3 possible evolutions in Generation 1, each requiring a different stone and producing drastically different results. This branching evolution creates replayability and strategic depth, as players must choose which evolution path to pursue without access to all options simultaneously. The Poliwag line's split between Poliwrath and Politoed creates a choice between immediate power through Waterstone evolution versus waiting for trade evolution access. The different stat distributions and move pools of the 2 evolution options create meaningfully different Pokémon despite sharing a common pre-evolution. This split demonstrates how evolution branching can create variety within a single evolutionary family. The gender mechanics in Generation 1 exist only as visual distinctions for certain species, with no mechanical differences between male and female Pokémon. Nidoran male and female are treated as entirely separate species despite being gender variants of the same base creature. This separation creates redundancy in the Pokédex while preventing gender from affecting battle performance or breeding compatibility, as breeding did not yet exist. The way certain species never appear in the wild despite being catchable through alternative means creates artificial scarcity around particular Pokémon. The starter Pokémon and their evolutions cannot be found through normal wild encounters, making them genuinely rare beyond the player's own starter. This exclusivity makes starters feel special and valuable, reinforcing the narrative significance of the initial partner choice. The legendary bird distribution across different optional areas creates a collecting quest where players must explore thoroughly to encounter all 3. Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres each occupy distinct locations that require specific HMs or sequence breaking to access, ensuring players must engage with multiple optional areas to complete the legendary collection. The placement of these powerful Pokémon as rewards for exploration reinforces the value of thorough world investigation. The Mewtwo encounter represents the ultimate challenge in Generation 1, combining extremely high catch difficulty with post-game accessibility requirements. The level 70 Mewtwo is dramatically stronger than any other wild encounter, creating a genuine test of battle skill and resource management. The intense difficulty of successfully capturing Mewtwo without using the Master Ball creates one of Generation 1's most memorable gameplay moments for players who successfully complete the challenge. The Mew glitch that allows encountering the mythical Pokémon through specific trainer manipulation demonstrates how dedicated players can discover unintended access to event-exclusive content. The complexity of executing the glitch ensures it remains obscure despite being theoretically available to anyone, creating a sense of secret knowledge among those who master the technique. The glitch's existence blurs the line between legitimate and illegitimate obtaining methods, as it uses only in-game mechanics without external modification. The way stat experience accumulation creates gradual permanent improvements to Pokémon stats encourages long-term training investment. Pokémon that have battled extensively against strong opponents gain higher stats than those that have battled weaker foes, even at identical levels. This hidden progression system rewards dedicated training while remaining opaque to players who don't understand the underlying mechanics. The system creates scenarios where two identical Pokémon at the same level can have noticeably different stats based purely on their battle history. The vitamin items that provide permanent stat increases create another avenue for optimization beyond just leveling and stat experience. Protein, iron, calcium, and carbos each boost specific stats permanently, allowing players to customize their Pokemon's growth beyond natural progression. The expense of these items and the caps on how many can be used per Pokemon create economic and strategic decisions around vitamin usage. The permanent nature of vitamin boosts makes them valuable long-term investments rather than consumable resources. The PP Up and PP Max items that increase move PP create yet another optimization axis where players can enhance move sustainability. These rare items allow Pokemon to use powerful moves more frequently before requiring healing, creating advantages in extended battles or dungeon exploration. The scarcity ensures PP optimization remains a luxury rather than an expectation, preventing the system from being required for viable play. The rare candy item provides instant level ups without battle experience, creating a shortcut for players wanting to quickly strengthen specific Pokemon. The limited availability of rare candies prevents them from trivializing progression while offering utility for players who want to quickly reach evolution levels or competitive strength. The choice to use rare candies immediately versus saving them for specific purposes creates another minor resource management decision. The way certain moves have secondary effects beyond damage creates additional strategic considerations in move selection. Moves that can cause paralysis, burn, freeze, or other status conditions provide value beyond their base power through potential disruption. The probability of secondary effects triggering creates variance, where moves can either function as pure damage or as combination damage and status appliers. This dual utility makes moves with secondary effects often more valuable than higher power moves with no additional effects. The recoil moves that damage the user when dealing damage create high-risk, high-reward options for offensive Pokemon. Moves like Double Edge and Takedown deal substantial damage, but injure the user in the process, creating scenarios where overly aggressive play can lead to self-defeat. The decision to include recoil moves in movesets requires careful consideration of whether the additional power justifies the self-harm risk. The charging moves that require a turn of preparation before executing create vulnerabilities where opponents can switch or attack during the charging period. Moves like Solar Beam and Skull Bash provide high power at the cost of predictability and delayed execution. The telegraphed nature of these moves makes them risky in competitive play despite their high base power, as skilled opponents can exploit the charging turn. The one-hit knockout moves represent the ultimate high-risk, high-reward attacks, capable of instantly defeating any opponent, but with extremely low accuracy. Fissure, Horn Drill, and Guillotine ignore damage calculations entirely, either missing completely or causing instant fainting. The low hit rate ensures these moves function primarily as Hail Mary options rather than reliable strategies, though their potential payoff makes them tempting inclusions in certain movesets. As the quiet details continue unfolding, it becomes clear that Generation 1's depth extends far beyond surface-level mechanics into intricate systems that reward study and experimentation. The interplay between visible mechanics and hidden calculations creates layers of strategic possibility that dedicated players can explore and optimize. The glitches and oversights that create unintended interactions add further depth, transforming the game into a platform for creative problem-solving and boundary pushing. The community that formed around discovering and documenting these obscure details represents a collective effort spanning decades. Each player who found a new glitch, documented a hidden mechanic, or shared optimization strategies contributed to a growing knowledge base that has preserved Generation 1's intricacies. This collaborative preservation ensures that even as the games age and newer entries release, the foundational knowledge about Kanto's secrets remains accessible to future players. The balance between accessibility and depth defines Generation 1's enduring appeal, with surface-level play being approachable while deeper engagement revealing sophisticated systems. Casual players can enjoy the journey without understanding stat experience or badge boosts, while dedicated players find endless optimization opportunities through mechanical mastery. This layered design philosophy ensures the games remain engaging for diverse player types across skill levels. The way certain Pokémon sprites differ between red, blue, and yellow versions creates visual variety that makes each game feel slightly distinct despite identical core gameplay. Yellow's Pikachu following mechanic and improved sprites for certain Pokémon demonstrate iterative refinement of the original red and blue foundation. These small differences create reasons for players to experience multiple versions beyond just version-exclusive Pokémon, as the visual presentation varies enough to feel fresh. The naming screen that allows players to customize Pokémon nicknames creates opportunities for personalization and attachment. The ability to give unique names to team members transforms generic species into individualized companions with personal identities. This naming system creates stronger emotional bonds between players and their Pokémon, as nicknamed creatures feel more like distinct characters than interchangeable stat collections. The way certain in-game trades offer Pokémon unavailable through wild encounters creates guaranteed access to otherwise rare species. The traded Pokémon often come with nicknames and different original trainer IDs, creating a sense that they are characters from other trainers being exchanged. These preset trades ensure all players can obtain specific Pokémon regardless of trading partner availability, preventing version exclusives from becoming completely inaccessible to solo players. The experience gained from trainer battles scales based on opponent Pokémon levels, creating greater rewards for defeating stronger trainers. This scaling ensures that later game battles provide appropriate experience gains without requiring extensive wild Pokémon grinding. The higher experience yields from trainer battles compared to wild encounters create incentives to seek out optional trainer fights rather than avoiding them. The way certain moves never appear on wild Pokémon or through level up, existing only as TM exclusive attacks, creates dependencies on finding and using specific technical machines. Moves like Earthquake and Blizzard can only be taught through TMs in Generation 1, making these machines particularly valuable. The single-use nature of TMs, combined with move exclusivity, creates high-stakes decisions about which Pokémon receive which exclusive moves. The Pokémon Center PC system organizes stored Pokémon into boxes with limited capacity, requiring manual box switching when boxes fill. This inconvenient system creates organizational challenges for players attempting to catch every Pokémon, as managing full boxes requires navigating menus to change active boxes. The capacity limitations force players to make decisions about which Pokémon to keep readily accessible versus deep in storage. The way rival battles are distributed throughout the journey creates narrative beats that punctuate progression milestones. Each rival encounter occurs at meaningful moments, such as after obtaining important items or before major challenges, creating a sense that the rivalry drives the story forward. The rival's team composition changes to counter the player's starter choice, ensuring the battles remain challenging through type advantage rather than pure level superiority. The Pokédex description system provides flavor text for each species, creating lore and personality beyond battle statistics. These descriptions range from scientific observations to mythological references, building a world where Pokémon exist as more than battle participants. The often exaggerated or contradictory Pokédex entries create a sense of unreliable narration that adds mystery to Pokémon biology and behavior. The Game Corner introduces gambling mechanics through slot machines and card games, creating an alternative method for obtaining rare Pokémon and items. The prize system allows players to exchange coins for rewards including Pokémon that cannot be obtained through normal catching. This gambling-based acquisition creates ethical complexity in a children's game, though the system functions primarily as an alternative progression path rather than mandatory content. The way certain items can be sold back to shops for half their purchase price creates a basic economic cycle where players can liquidate unwanted items for cash. This selling system prevents items from becoming completely worthless after acquisition while ensuring players cannot exploit buying and selling for profit. The 50% return rate creates economic friction that prevents unlimited money generation through item flipping. The Super Potion, Hyper Potion, and Max Potion tier system creates healing item progression matching the increasing HP pools of leveled Pokémon. Early game potions become inadequate as Pokémon grow stronger, forcing players to upgrade to more expensive healing items. This progression creates another money sink that prevents excessive wealth accumulation while ensuring healing remains viable throughout the game. The revive items that restore fainted Pokémon create safety nets against total party wipes during dungeon exploration. The ability to restore defeated team members without returning to Pokémon centers allows deeper dungeon penetration and reduces the penalty for having Pokémon faint. The relative scarcity and expense of revives compared to healing items creates resource management decisions around when to use them versus retreating for free healing. The X attack, X defense, and other temporary stat boost items provide battle-specific advantages that disappear after combat ends. These consumable buffs create alternative strategies where players can gain temporary power spikes during important battles at the cost of item resources. The single battle duration ensures these items cannot trivialize progression while offering tactical options for particularly difficult encounters. The guard spec item that prevents stat reductions creates counterplay against opponents that rely on stat-lowering strategies. This specific defensive utility demonstrates how items can create strategic complexity beyond simple damage and healing. The temporary nature of guard spec's protection creates timing considerations around when to use it for maximum effectiveness. The dire hit item that boosts critical hit rate creates another temporary advantage item, though its effectiveness is limited by Generation 1's already high critical hit rates for fast Pokémon. The item's existence demonstrates the developer's anticipated critical hit manipulation being valuable, even though the actual implementation made it less crucial than intended. The limited utility makes dire hit one of the less valuable temporary boost items. The way certain NPCs gift rare items for completing small favors creates mini-quests that reward exploration and NPC interaction. These item gifts range from useful tools, like the item finder, to valuable consumables like evolution stones. The quest structure encourages thorough exploration while providing tangible rewards beyond just Pokédex completion and story progression. The bike shop offering a bicycle for 1 million Pokédollars creates an impossible purchase that forces players to seek the bike voucher through alternative means. This artificial impossibility creates a quest structure where players must help NPCs to receive the voucher, transforming bike acquisition into a narrative event. The extreme price serves as a humorous acknowledgement that some items cannot be obtained through simple economic means. The town map's utility extends beyond simple navigation to include tracking visited locations and identifying remaining unexplored areas. The comprehensive geographical overview helps players plan routes and identify gaps in their exploration. The map's availability early in the game ensures players never become completely lost, though it still requires active navigation rather than automatic pathfinding. The Pokeflute's specific utility for waking sleeping Snorlax creates a tool that unlocks previously blocked routes. The item's singular purpose makes it a classic adventure game key item, existing solely to resolve specific obstacles. The Pokeflute's acquisition through the game's main story ensures players naturally obtain it when needed, preventing soft locks from missing crucial progression items. The SS Ann's temporary availability creates pressure to complete ship exploration before it departs. Players who miss obtaining certain items or seeing specific content before the ship leaves cannot return, creating permanent missable content. This temporary access creates urgency and consequence for player decisions, though the missed content is primarily optional rather than critical to progression. The Cinnabar Island Gym's quiz structure creates an alternative to the standard trainer gauntlet format used by other gyms. Players can optionally answer trivia questions to skip battles, creating a knowledge-based shortcut through the gym. This variety in gym structure prevents all 8 gyms from feeling identical, adding mechanical diversity to the gym challenge system. The Unknown Dungeon's complex layout and high-level wild encounters create substantial post-game content for players seeking challenges beyond the Elite Four. The dungeon's confusing geography makes navigation difficult without mapping, while the powerful Pokémon provide experience and training opportunities. The placement of Mewtwo as the dungeon's ultimate reward creates a compelling reason to fully explore the most difficult area in the game. As the final details settle into place, the picture of Generation 1 that emerges is one of ambitious design constrained by hardware but elevated by creative problem-solving. The glitches became features, the limitations inspired innovations, and the rough edges created charm that polished sequels would struggle to recapture. The obscure facts scattered throughout Kanto represent not just trivia, but evidence of a game built by a small team taking enormous risks on unproven concepts. The legacy of these obscure details lives on in the communities that preserve them, document them, and share them across generations of players. Each discovered glitch, each hidden dialogue, each exploit represents a small piece of gaming history that might have been lost without dedicated archival efforts. The fact that players continue discovering new details decades after release demonstrates the depth hidden within apparently simple Game Boy games. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest, and you might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest, and you might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again.